Welcome back to Money Making Sense, the show that talks about all things money. Today, we're talking small potatoes. It is called the Four Corners potatoes, and this actually is kind of a big deal in the produce world, right? I've Bruce Pavlik joining me. He is the Director of Conservation at Red Butte Gardens, and also Lisbeth Lauderback. You are a professor of anthropology at the University of Utah, and this Four Corners potato, at the last segment, we found out that we can get bigger ones. This is a very small potato, but we believe we can get larger potatoes out of it. Would they possibly be the size of some of the red potatoes or white potatoes, but maybe not as big as a russet?
Yeah, something like a new potato. I don't know what the ultimate limit on size is, but I think the important thing here is the nutrition content. And what analyses have shown is that this particular species, which is Solanum jamesii, is more nutritious than the potato that we know from the market. It has higher levels of essential minerals. It has higher protein content. There's a whole list of things that make it actually better for you than the potato that we know. So that would be the thing to preserve. And, if the potatoes were smaller, that would be okay if they were more nutritious. There's a couple of other issues before this potato goes to market. One is that these tubers, each potato, is put into the ground by the plant on a long stem that takes that tuber away from the parent plant underground.
Oh.
And that underground stem is called a stolon. And the thing about that is, it lowers the risk of that tuber being found near the parent plant in terms of living in the wild and things that could dig it up or whatever.
Right.
But that's not very advantageous in terms of growing them.
Right.
Because they're going to sort of be running around through your, right? So one of the things that has happened in the store-bought potato is that they've gotten rid of that stolon lengthening. And so all the potatoes cluster near the base of the plant, and they're much easier to harvest.
So 7,000 years ago, when those potatoes were found in South America, did they grow similar to what these Four Corners potato did?
We suspect so, yes. Again, we don't know the parents exactly, or we have suspicions about who are the parents. But yes, they were wild species that would benefit from dispersing their tubers rather than clustering them at the base of the plant.
Okay. So modifying potatoes is nothing new. That's been going on for years and years, but it's been done by a process called hybridization. Now, tell us what that means for anybody who doesn't know.
It's very simple. It's simply just taking the pollen from one species and moving that pollen, which is the male gamete, the male seed, if you will, to the stigma, to the flower of another species. And so that pollen moves and it creates a combination of two gene sets.
Okay.
So hybridization is bringing two species together by using the pollen of one and then the female part of another and creating what is essentially an entirely new organism.
Okay. Now, what is genetically modifying something?
Well, see, that's an unfortunate term because hybridization is a form of modification.
But it's more now. I would consider it more natural. I mean, there's always a chance in the wild, wind, bees, whatever, could carry one pollen from one species to a different species, and they just happen to get together really well, and they create a whole new species.
That's true. But
genetically modifying, in my mind, is we are messing with things that maybe we shouldn't, like adding things to a plant that, like I'm going to do tomatoes. Tomatoes taste horrible now. I'm sorry. They've taken out, because they've genetically modified them to be able to travel long distances and not get mushy or not wilt or fall apart on the trip from, say, California all the way across the country. They're firm, they're great, they stay greener longer, so they don't ripen quite so fast, but they taste bad. to me. I mean, they don't have it, not that they taste bad. They have no taste at all. There is no taste in tomatoes anymore. And I don't consider that a good thing. Also, like corn, soy, things like that, they've added pesticides to the germ so that insects don't want to eat them. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Well, it's true. A lot of these modifications that have happened are to benefit the production end, not the consumer end. And a lot of that has to do with either trying to raise production because we have increasing human populations. So we have to get more out of each acre of land. And that's one of the driving forces behind that technology.
Right.
Or, as you say, the ripening difference, the transport to market, or having them to be squarer so they actually fit in a truck better. That's
right.
Another modification of tomatoes. Or, hopefully, to use less herbicide, as in the case of a number of plants, including one that was developed to be more resistant to Roundup, for example, which is glyphosate. And the idea is you could use less glyphosate, target the weeds in the field without targeting the plant, the cultivated plant.
Right.
Yes. So yes. And then some of the other things that have been done, I mean, basically, there's two types of genetic modification in the modern sense, not hybridization and not there's another form of natural speciation where the chromosome numbers actually double in a plant. And that creates species almost instantaneously. So you can get a doubling or a tripling of the chromosome numbers, and that produces a new kind of plant. But those are not what we usually group in what's called genetic modification. So genetic modification includes insertion of a foreign gene, which is, I think, what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Or simply inhibiting genes that are already present in that plant. And one of potato varieties, a relatively new potato variety, was engineered in that way to inhibit the production of an amino acid, a naturally occurring amino acid called asparagine, because when potatoes are fried, asparagine is turned into a cancer-causing compound, acrylamide. And so there was great interest in reducing the asparagine to reducing acrylamide in fried potatoes, which, as you know, are a huge part of the market.
Right.
And that particular potato was called innate because everything that was present was not foreign. It was innate. All you were doing is inhibiting how the genes were being expressed.
So how would the potato be used if we didn't fry it? Let's pretend we couldn't genetically modify it and we knew it was a potentially cancer-causing thing to do to fry it. What would you do to cook that potato, or could you?
Well, you could. It has something to do with the high temperatures of frying. So I don't know that as much acrylamide is formed in boiling. Maybe that would be a way of not converting as much. I don't really know. That's just speculation on my part.
Okay.
But, I mean, another solution would be to look for other populations of that potato species that may not have high asparagine levels naturally. And that's a big that's one of the things we're really concerned about with the Four Corners potato, as well as the potato that comes to market. Because, as you mentioned, the Irish potato famine, that was because the genetic diversity of potatoes in Ireland in the 19th century was incredibly low, and they happened to be very, very susceptible to potato blight. And without the genetic variation, without the resistance to the blight, that's what wiped out the potato crop, caused millions to either die or flee the country. Tremendous disaster.
And is the U.S. potato production sort of in that range right now that the Irish were in 150 years ago?
No, we have a lot more genetic variation. Places like the U.S. Potato Gene Bank are specializing in collecting that genetic variation from across the range of Solanum tuberosum, the potato that we know, and all the other species. And we should mention that how many species of tuber-forming solanums are there? Almost 200 or something?
Yeah, about 180.
About 180 tuber-forming solanums out there in the world.
Okay.
So that's a huge treasure trove. That's why we argue biodiversity is so important, because look at the genetic libraries that exist in nature. And with the Four Corners potato, we collect from multiple populations just for that purpose. That the fact that these are in different bags is not, just by happenstance. They are each genetically unique in some way, and we want to preserve that variation across the range of this species.
Okay. We do need to take another break. When we come back, we're going to ask a few more questions, get more information on this potato and what that means for the potato industry, get a little bit more in-depth in that. So we will be right back with Lisbeth Lauderback and with Bruce Pavlik.